yes, it is having a meaningful impact, but the toolkit will probably allow us to solve things that we never thought were solvable. It'll help get us to unimaginably better work than we could have achieved. So how do we use those kinds of things to solve for tasks that maybe your team shouldn't be doing that, adding a lot of value, and moving them upward to better, more creative tasks?
Welcome to Revenue Cycle Above the Bottom Line, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of revenue cycle management. I'm your host, Tim Reiner, and in each episode, we sit down with industry leaders, innovators, and experts to explore challenges and strategies shaping the future of healthcare revenue cycle. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out in the field, this podcast is your space for thought-provoking conversations, actionable career learnings, and discussions about the latest trends you need to know about. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started. Today, I'm joined by Rob Roy, Senior Vice President, Chief Investment Officer, and Co-Head of Environmental Sustainability for AdventHealth. In this role, he oversees investments in the nation's 8th largest faith-based health system. In addition, he co-leads the company's environmental transformation, including all emissions, waste, and water streams, and cooperates on the company-wide sustainability reporting. Rob, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim.
So just jumping off into your career, you're currently involved in investments, but you got your start in the Chicago Mercantile in like sort of the pit. So describe those early kind of the formulating crucible of your personality in that sort of pit environment.
Yeah, just a little bit before I went into the pit, I started in 1989 at Putnam Investments, and I was a muni bond trader there. So it's what we call like upstairs trading on a desk. A little more civilized, but still kind of rough for what you would consider kind or normal corporate culture. But I knew that I wanted to go to graduate school, and I went to Chicago. And so while I was there, I spent 2 years trading in the pit. And, you know, it's just like you see in the movies. It's pretty rough and tumble. It's a very physical environment. How loud and how large you are can oftentimes determine how profitable you are. And so it's, you know, it's a bit of a locker room, football type environment to be in.
And the psychology you were describing that is kind of like riding the wave of like what futures are being traded or what, I assume that was a lot of like commodity trades and even gold, and back then probably S&P futures. Like what was being traded at that point?
Yes, all of those commodities were being traded. So both normal physical commodities such as lumber or corn or wheat, financial commodity or futures contracts on S&P or T-bonds, options on these things. It's a whole gamut of instruments that was traded at that time.
And you could sort of see the room and read the room at times.
Yeah, what was interesting was my experience getting there was that most of the people on the floor were not trained financial professionals. They weren't, they didn't have degrees in economics or finance. These were, more from the tougher neighborhoods in Chicago. Your size, your brashness, the boldness that you had was an advantage to you. And because it was physical trading where there was voice going back and forth and the yelling, it was more a matter of sensing what the flows were in the room. Where were the orders coming from? Where were they going to? How could you get in front of it? It was really a visceral type of atmosphere as opposed to a cerebral atmosphere.
Yeah, not a lot of analysis going on.
Not a lot of analysis going on.
Gut instinct. Okay, so that is a huge contrast from moving to AdventHealth in about late 90s, right? 98, you go from this culture to a much more conservative kind of Seventh-day Adventist-based culture, right? Tell me about how that transition went off.
Well, I mean, the floor in Chicago is not uncommon to have a fist fight on a daily basis. The pits were tiered, so there were stairs, and getting your position often meant shoving or physically pushing people down the stairs. Apparently that's frowned upon in most corporate cultures. Yeah. And AdventHealth has a very kind, Christian focus to it. So it was a bit of an abrupt transition, but I knew why I was here and I did my best to adjust.
So if you think back to those times in the investment area, we obviously were much smaller. You probably had a lot less money to invest at the time. And the dynamics of the market are just fundamentally different. The amount of information perhaps that you have, your operation now is very analytical. You've got all kinds of real-time information. I suppose in '98 there was some. Were there Bloomberg terminals back then? Was there information starting to come with the internet, and that was sort of the first wave of that?
There was a little bit. I mean, you have to remember, so I started in 1989 in Boston. We really, like, the internet existed, but email was a brand new thing. Right. There really wasn't a lot in terms of real-time information. So between 89 and 98, it's not that long of a period. When I get here in 98, AdventHealth had a Bloomberg terminal. There weren't the analytics, there weren't the real-time data, there wasn't the same focus on it. Yeah. And then since then, we've obviously grown that out quite a bit, and the sophistication has changed.
We talked pre-interview a little bit about how kind of spirituality has impacted, both of our careers, and I've seen, different places in my career. Maybe reflect a little bit on how God has led your path and influenced your path in investments.
Yeah, I think, given some of what I've just told you about with Chicago and Wall Street, I think to me, it's an absolute miracle, one, that I'm alive, and two, that I'm here. I still remember exactly where I was in 1997, and while my life was progressing very well on a professional basis, it was regressing badly on a spiritual basis. And I remember saying a prayer, okay, you've given me a certain amount of skills and talents, thank you, but I feel like there's something else for me. What else do you have for me that could get me back on the right path? And within 6 months, I had gone from that sort of desperate situation to working at AdventHealth. And I mean, just that kind of experience clarifies for you the role that God has in your life. And it reminds me of that frequently, because people have asked me the same question, Tim, like, how'd you get here? It's kind of a wild ride. Say, well, God was clearly there.
Yeah. And there's obviously a lot of other things along the way, little decisions that he's influenced as well. One of the things that's big, that must have been big in your household, and I thought I was doing well having 2 bachelor's degrees, but you've got me beat. You have 2 bachelor's degrees, 2 master's degrees, and a PhD. So maybe talk a little bit about, like, is that a fundamental value from, like, your parents, your family, or is that just a voracious appetite on your part to, like, learn and be educated, or something else?
I think it's a little bit of both. So all of us appreciated education. Yeah. We all get a different set of skills. I learned that my bandwidth or throughput for academic work was pretty good, and I actually really enjoyed it. But what's driven it further than maybe normal has been just constant inquisitiveness, like the follow-up question. I had a mentor many years ago that talked about the ability to study in different subjects and then find the connecting points between them. So if you can study in things like finance, economics, environmental sustainability, each of those is interesting, but there's a lot of people that have gone deep on any one of them. Yeah. When you start putting together combinations of things, the number of people that have done that shrink, and your ability to find the connecting points between subjects gives you an ability to add value. And so I keep finding ways where I need to know more. In order to lead something at AdventHealth, I need to know something more about a particular topic, and then as you get into it, you see those connecting points, and hopefully that drives value for what we're doing here.
Your current role is Chief Investment Officer. Like, what does your day-to-day look like, and how's that changed, since the late 90s or over the past 20 years? I'm sure it's evolved quite a bit as the size of the portfolio and the kind of sophistication has grown.
The financial markets have changed a lot. Yeah. We've gone through a period that I would term financialization. Yeah. Essentially everything is tradable. Yep. Back when I was in Chicago, the fact that I was on the floor in the pit allowed me to trade implied volatility, which was a characteristic of an options contract. Yeah. I had an advantage because of my knowledge and my physical location to trade that. Today, you can trade that in your 401k. I like to joke, my dentist...
The proximity doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, my dentist dad could put implied volatility into his 401k if he wanted to today. And so we've seen that financialization grow. Yeah. The level of analytic has changed quite a bit. And then also the globalization of capital markets has really exploded. So today, it's a matter of saying, what is it that the company needs? What are the best practices that we have today around data, analytics, and thinking? how can we construct a portfolio that's going to support AdventHealth in its journey, where we are today and where we're going. But to your question of, what's my day-to-day, as the Chief Investment Officer, I don't spend my time thinking about, should we buy Coke versus Pepsi, or even manager A versus manager B. So I spend a lot of my time trying to think about what's going to be necessary in the future to manage that part of the enterprise in the right way, and then what do we need to be doing today in order to make that happen.
What that basically means is that there's maybe a little bit more appetite for risk. Like when you have a stronger financial position, you can perhaps take on additional risk. Or what does that mean when you say it's like the difference between $12.5 billion and $100 billion is different? Like maybe pull the thread on that. What
Sure.
does that mean?
Yeah, so two large threads that we can pull on here. One is, when I started in '98, the organization was in a weaker financial position. The investment portfolio was still a substantial part of the balance sheet, but we didn't have the financial strength to withstand a lot of market volatility.
The operation itself.
Yeah, the operation itself. So the balance sheet was weaker. And actually, I think in '98, we were either near break even or actually losing money on the operating business. So you had a long road to hoe there in terms of getting the business to the strength that we needed.
Yeah.
But what you didn't want to do is really start to focus on building the business, building the strength of the balance sheet, while at the same time taking too much risk in the investment portfolio. Because there was a potential for us to ruin all of the good work that was happening across the business by an unfortunate market event. The second thread, though, is that the world has actually become more complicated. So I've thought about the heuristic of how we manage these businesses, and it used to be that when you were small, you outsourced most all of what you did to consultants and asset managers.
Yeah.
But as you got bigger and bigger, there were economies of scale that started to come into the business. And so managing more of the portfolio internally, hiring your own team, having your own analytics in place, allowed you to take advantage of that economy of scale, save cost by doing things internally. And that's the path that most people have followed. I'm more interested or concerned with the fact that the technology stack is changing so rapidly that if we look at the market leaders in our business or in any business, the market leaders are spending at an existential rate to protect their market share.
Yeah.
We will benefit tremendously by being able to access the best technologies and the best analytics possible. But I'm pretty clear we're not going to be spending at an existential rate on investment analytics.
Yeah.
And so I really start to think about partnerships with the most capable managers in the world to try to do three things. One, how do we take the items that maybe we shouldn't be doing or that where we're not creating unique value and handing those off to partners? In the middle part, where we can create unique value, how do we find a partner and work with them to co-create the design and implementation of the portfolio? And how do we spend our time doing the things that only we can do at AdventHealth, which is understanding our culture, the needs of the organization, the way that governance works here, and finding the right solution set. There's not one right way to build a portfolio, but through that partnership, I think we're going to have a better approach rather than using the old heuristic, which is just to continue to do more and more and more work internally.
Well, and this kind of I think discussion connects in with my next question, which is, as an investment leader, you have a lot of pressure for not messing up the results of the operating business, right? Like a bunch of losses in a given year tend to be detrimental, or that would be problematic. And I know that there's mechanisms where we sort of mitigate that risk, but maybe if you think back to 2008, how were you feeling back then? Was that nerve-wracking, or you just felt like we have a plan, everything's fine, it's going to be okay? Or is there some in between that you were feeling back in the financial crisis of 2008?
If you're in financial markets for a long time, there's a lot of nerve-wracking moments, right? And the way that you get through those is excess preparation. And so, coming into 2008, it was interesting because, again, remember the journey that we've been on. We didn't have nearly as much risk as our peers did in the portfolio because we didn't have a balance sheet that was as strong. And really what happened in 2008 was you had a large sell-off in the housing market and in the stock market that went with it. I mean, the stock indices were down, 50, 60. I think the NASDAQ was down 85% at one point. We didn't have that much in the way of stock or equity holdings at that point in time because we couldn't afford the risk. So, the way that we've worked through these crises in the past and the way that we'll do them in the future is to first of all understand what is AdventHealth capable of withstanding in terms of a downside event. You want to take as much risk as possible in the portfolio because that drives your return, subject to the fact that you must be able to withstand, the down 2, 3, 4, 5 standard deviation type of event.
Yeah.
Now, the good news is with analytics and understanding of markets, we can get a pretty good sense of what a really bad event looks like in the portfolio. And so each year as we look at the business and we look at the balance sheet and we look at the strength of the operating business, we look at the size of the investment portfolio and we'll model out, okay, if we take this much risk and we have a down 2 standard deviation event, so it's a 5% worst case event, how big of a loss is that? Then you translate that through and say, if we have that size loss, what does it mean to our days cash on hand? What does it mean to our debt to cap? What does it mean to our cash to debt? Nobody's going to like that loss, but if the impact of that loss isn't going to change course on your mission and your ability to execute on providing care in your communities, then it's probably an acceptable risk. And so the first step really is to try to thread that needle and say, what feels right here? And over time, fortunately, as this has played out, we've been able to take more and more risk in the portfolio because the operating business and the capital model and the way that they've sort of patiently built the business has allowed us to get there. But there will be more crises.
Yeah.
I also find communicating in advance about the kinds of things that could happen, that's the risk modeling, communicating more in real time about the things that are concerning me, and then when things really go wrong, stepping up communication so that people can see the finer details of what's happening in the moment, putting that in context. Those 3 steps together have allowed the leadership of the organization to remain relatively calm through those moments and see our way through it.
Before we continue, we wanted to thank you for tuning in. If you have questions or thoughts or just want to say hi, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at revcyclepodcast@adventhealth.com. That is REVCYCLE podcast@adventhealth.com. If you enjoyed this episode so far, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow so you never miss a new episode release. Now, let's get back to the rest of the episode. This is the book that our CFO gave us maybe 5 or 6 years ago at a CFO conference. It's Race for Tomorrow by Simon Mundy. And it's sort of a travelogue and, pulls the thread on various countries and how they're dealing with climate change, essentially. So you have this co-lead of our environmental sustainability within AdventHealth. Like, how did that come about, like in context of this book, and kind of what are you doing in that area?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I have the great fortune to co-lead this area with Marisa Faribaugh, who's our Chief Supply Chain Officer. And to me, it's been a wonderful experience working with her. She and I are very different people, but together, I think we've been able to lead in the first leg of this work reasonably well. From my perspective, this started because in my world of investments, I'd seen many of my peers, chief investment officers, who were responding to a change in attitude from their stakeholders. People's attitudes were changing about how capital and values interacted, and that was not something that had happened before. About 5 or 6 years ago, the board, in updating our enterprise risk management framework, said this is one of the top 10 items that we face as an organization. And so Marisa and I were asked to step into this space. We were told later, it was because we're both systems thinkers. We think in frameworks. She's an industrial engineer. Mathematics is probably one of the things that has influenced my thinking quite a bit. But we're also both finance people. So we were likely to approach the problem from a very structured way and also a financially responsible way. The good news is that both of us worked for Paul Rathbun, the CFO at the time, and Paul had read this book by Simon Mundy.
Yeah.
You can approach this work from a very technical perspective and all of the issues that are contributing to it and how it might be solved.
Right.
Or you could approach this work from a very humanist perspective. And Simon's work was really a collection of stories about how people all over the world are being impacted every day.
Just bumping into each other. Right?
Yeah, in how climate is affecting them. It's not a, far in the future, one day we're going to see this effect, but look, in these low-lying islands in Micronesia or in the Arctic North in the tundra, here's how people live and here's how their lives have been negatively impacted and changing.
Right.
That really sort of sparked something for Paul that got him very passionate about this.
Give our team something to be really proud about, like in the rev cycle area, or even the housekeepers, the clinicians. Like, we've done obviously a bunch of wind and solar. Like, give me the rundown of the things, the top 3 things you're most proud of that we've accomplished so far.
Well, I mean, one of the hardest things, and you should all be proud of this, is that you have a board that is aware, is intentional, and have really given us the license to go and do this kind of meaningful work. They see the connection between this work and how it supports our mission, right? So be proud of that, because most of the organizations that we interact with are always trying to push the ball up the hill. You have really well-intended people in the organization at some level that band together with a project and they try to move that up the hill. One of the great advantages that we have is from the board, our C-suite, the work that Maurice and I get to lead in. This is work that's easier because we're going downhill, not uphill. So first of all, be incredibly proud of the fact that you work for an organization that is that forward thinking.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the implementation, we started with emissions. We think about emissions, waste, and water as the major ways that we impact the planet. We started with emissions because we felt that that was the biggest, most important issue that was right in front of us. And it's not that trash is not a problem, but it's maybe not as immediate a problem as solving the emissions crisis. When we look at our emissions, the biggest areas that we can directly impact are the things that are happening on our campus, like anesthetic emissions, fleet, things like that. But the even larger one is the electricity that we consume.
Yep.
And so we led in a couple of different deals and some projects that we've done across the organization. You talked about wind and solar. We have a very large wind project that we engaged in, and that started for us at the beginning of 2024. That was about a third of our electricity was being supplied by that. And then in just a few weeks, January 1st, 2026, we have a very large 3,000 plus acre solar project where we're the sole off-taker from that project. Between those two projects and the on-site work that we've done in solar in various locations, AdventHealth on January 1, 2026 will have achieved 100% renewable electricity across all of our locations.
What would be your recommendation on identifying any key areas within perhaps RevCycle that we can maybe think about waste or look for a way to plug into the sustainability or environmental work?
I think there's always going to be opportunity for efficiency. Efficiency is one of the levers that business has pulled on forever and ever. How you pull that lever today is different. I think you've probably changed up the number of times that people drive to the office in your business. I think that's there. I think you're using probably a lot of technology, and so taking advantage of some of our programs like our AIT e-waste program for recycling.
We're trying to use less paper, although I'm not sure that's got a huge impact, but I would love to send less paper bill statements to people. I'd love to scan less paperwork in the EMR. So those are the kinds of things where I think the practical rubber might meet the road, but I didn't know if there was other things that came to mind.
I'll flip the script on you a little bit. I had a conversation this morning about the environmental impact of artificial intelligence. Isn't it using a lot more compute power and electricity and causing a negative impact? I think my view on it is completely the opposite, which is, yes, it is having a meaningful impact, but the toolkit will probably allow us to solve things that we never thought were solvable. It'll help get us to unimaginably better work than we could have achieved. So how do we use those kinds of things to solve for tasks that maybe your team shouldn't be doing that are adding a lot of value, and moving them upward to better, more creative tasks. Because I think that if we do lean in on the technology, one of the issues that it will solve is its own energy efficiency problem.
I had the good fortune of having a father and a family and a grandfather that would tell me about the rule of 72 and compounding interest. I was like an 8-year-old, like learning about these things. And what was instilled in me is like you start saving early. And even as a registration rep when I was 17 years old, I was contributing to my 401k with the company because there was this match, and like, why wouldn't you take free money? So you are over our kind of retirement plan. So that's one of your responsibilities as a chief investment officer. What is your advice? And you told me kind of a personal story, so like maybe unlock there, but what's the advice to young people or old people about saving for retirement?
Yeah, the Adventist Healthcare Retirement Plan, AHRP, which all of our team members should be a part of, recently did a little video analysis showing, and I may get this not exactly right, but something like if you were to start putting $500 a month away when you were in your 20s, by the time you reached age 65, more than half of the money in your retirement plan would come from your 20s. Right? Because of that compounding effect that's there. But I just want to back up a little bit and hopefully we'll make the point stronger. Money is not our purpose. Money is not what gives us worth, but it is an important component of your life that you need to have a framework for how you're going to deal with. I saw a quote recently that said, wealth is not based on income, it's based on spending. You could be rich or poor at any income level.
That's right.
But if you spend less than what you earn, if you save consistently, and I've found if you take a portion of your earnings and you give it to others, the benefits that come into your life, through compounding, which is that, like, I think Warren Buffett called it the eighth wonder of the world, or maybe it was Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world, which is just like this, money making money on its own. Starting early, having that, and then the benefits that come from having money in an open hand. A closed hand is, this is all mine, and an open hand is, some of this is mine, but some of this is going to be for the benefit of others. Like, your life is just different having done all of those things. So for all of our teammates, please start early. If it's not early, it's never too late. My oldest daughter has recently started, she's an OR nurse here in Orlando. And I said, look, I know you're not a financial professional, but we're going to start with some non-negotiables. The non-negotiables are, you spend less than you earn.
There you go.
You maximize your retirement savings. You don't carry any credit card debt, so whatever you charge, you pay off each month. And at least 10% of your income will go into a charitable account that you can decide how you want to benefit others in the future. And I said, if you do those things, sometimes you may find yourself, a little ahead, a little bit behind, but you do those things consistently and options will be available to you in your life that you couldn't even imagine before. And now it's fun to watch as she updates that spreadsheet every month and to see the value of that happening on a consistent basis. It's really empowering.
So just kind of reflecting on one last topic, in the revenue cycle, I've kind of challenged my teams to kind of move from a world-class revenue cycle, which was kind of our, motivational moniker, to now being a preeminent faith-based, consumer-focused healthcare organization. So how do we sort of become even better than world-class, if you will? Is there anything that resonates from your perspective on how you do that in investments? Like, how do you think about kind of getting to a preeminent, organization in your, downline?
It's interesting. I think in my line of work, there's a lot of technical details, as there are in everybody else's, and we obviously want to be good at all those. And I think we intend that when we say preeminent. But I feel, having come from Wall Street in the late 80s and early 90s and understanding that culture, there is a level of impact that we can have on our partners. There's an impact that we can have on the world when we interact with them in a way that seems normal to our culture, but is very different to their culture. And so having high technical expertise is what is table stakes are required for being preeminent.
Right.
But as we go out into the world and we connect with, and you do it in RevCycle and many other areas of the organization do this, but as we go into our respective industry roles, carry the true culture and meaning and purpose in the way that we treat people. You have high technical expertise and high care for others. You'll be known as preeminent. There'll be nobody that's even remotely like you in that space. And I think too often people focus on just the technical side and not on the other side, not on the character and the care side of it.
We talked about a bunch of stuff. Is there anything that you would sort of provide as a key takeaway? Maybe a mentor that you've had. We talked about in the pre-interview talking about that. Is there anything you'd want to share or reflect on, a mentor that's been, sort of key to your journey?
One of the things I tell I have two girls that are 20 and 24 now, and what I've told them over the years is be curious and be kind.
Okay.
The world is going to offer us a number of different questions and opportunities. We're going to face that with the gifts that we've been given by our Creator. If we can remember to be curious and kind, I think it carries us a long ways.
Okay.
You've touched on the curiosity piece that's shown up in the way that academics has been a part of my life. In the way that I've been asked to lead in a number of different sort of disparate areas across the organization.
So we had people ask, the previous guests ask a question, and their question, and you'll get to do this too, and give the next guest a question, but the question is, what country is on your bucket list to travel to? I know you travel, but is there a place that's on your bucket list that you'd like to go?
AdventHealth has a whole global missions work that we do, and I think we're in something like 20 different countries now. I was asked a couple of years ago to co-lead the Mexico global mission, which is, my mother was from Mexico City, and I'm half Mexican, so that was the tie-in. But now that we're going to go again next week on another mission trip, I'm thinking some of maybe our mission footprints in Nepal. I'd love to go there. Tanzania, Kenya, places like that would be of high interest. I'm probably a little less interested in going places just from a touristy, self-serving perspective. And just personally, I'd love to go and see them from that missional perspective.
Thanks for joining me today. I really have appreciated our conversation, and I'm really glad that you're part of the organization.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's very kind.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Please make sure to like and subscribe to be notified when our next episode drops. We'll catch you next time.